Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out to hear us, panelists and the guests that we have on today. We've got Rob joining us now as well. So I'll pass over to you, Rob, to introduce us to the topic and carry on. Thanks, Rob.
Well, thank you, Taryn, and welcome everyone to the much interested webinar on our stronger standards and new rules, which are coming into effect on July 1. Before we get into that topic, I just wanted to go through some of the key housekeeping items that we have in terms of our formats. And firstly, I would like to welcome and acknowledge the custodian of the country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. And we pay our respects to the elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Now, just to remind everyone, these webinars do qualify for one continuous education point, so please add that to your logs as a financial year or calendar year for this event does continue to play out. And lastly, just in terms of housekeeping, we will have an ongoing chat and be documented in a number of the questions that most of you will and no doubt have. Please continue to add. We'll try to get to most of them on this session. We have a lot baked in, and I'll quickly move to really the content which all of you are seeking to understand. But as we'll cover off today, we will share with you some of the survey findings that were out in the media late last week that we conducted about 400 plus surveys on executives across the country and really capturing some of that sentiment. We're going to go over some of the regulatory landscape and update, where my colleagues will provide the moving parts that are still in motion, and much of that we're still waiting on. And then we'll go over to and introduce our panel of specific experts and providers, and hear specifically from them as to how they are preparing and dealing with some of the still to be determined items within the legislation. And then joining us from Russell Kennedy Lawyers will go and focus on a legal lens of the new rules and the standards before returning to our panel and to close out with a much informative question and answer. So as noted, a lot packed, a lot to get through, so let's get going. Well, just on the topic of the sentiment piece, surely there is a lot of organizations across the country that are dealing with the same challenges of being prepared for the new Aged Care Act in July. But one of the sentiment pieces we wanted to understand is where and how people were feeling about that. So really the big insight is that only 7% are feeling very prepared and having a clear strategy in place. And I guess that does fit nicely around the fact that we understand loosely what's coming, but we're still waiting for more of the finer details. And so 77% of the audience or panelists are noting that they're somewhat prepared. So I think that was quite appropriate and probably very apt to the situation that everyone is going through, with also some of that vagueness still to be determined. And I guess one of the other aspects we wanted to know and speak to, which we'll cover off today, is of those aspects of the aged care reforms. How are organizations, how are providers feeling about what are the most challenging elements of it? And overwhelmingly, it was actually a fair representative balance here, but I think we attributed this to really the different cohorts or segments of the businesses in which each of your exec teams and wider support teams are focusing on within their silos of getting the businesses ready. So 36% was the standout. So that was largely navigating new regulatory and compliance frameworks that are being imposed on operations and clinical care delivery. And then 27% was the second, was mostly around the managing financial and operational impacts. So again, attributing that probably more to that audience of financial and other general operation managers. And then the third balanced one was more from the people and leadership teams. So ensuring that staff and leadership teams are adequately trained. And that was really that balance, and I feel the insight there that really leads to the last outcome of just meeting the new aged care quality standards of 14%. So some good insight, but also represented by probably the areas of the business that are responding to this and how they feel. And I believe, Dottie, we have an engagement, a little bit of a poll. We're going to look at some of this briefly. But on the final questions we had, and there is a support tools, we wanted to hear from you. But what support would you or would be most valuable in preparing for these 2025 reforms? So we've heard from a lot of the client base, and we'll hear more today. But we wanted to really understand, 44% noted the request for more practical tools and training for leadership teams. So we wanted to understand then, what does that look like for each of you? And so we've devised a poll. It should be popping up on your screen. And if you can take a quick second as you fill out a couple of the tick boxes here. I'm just being reminded that if you're a panelist or a host, we cannot participate, but certainly we are quite interested to understand what that looks like from really that representation of the different parts of the business and where they're concerned about. But whilst we wait for those polls to come in and finalize, 30% of that base said that more government guidance and sector-wide collaboration would be nice. So nearly a third is feeling that way. And I would also endorse that, given that we are a month away and still have quite a bit of detail that I know we're waiting on. And as technology vendors as well, we're still navigating and committing to a lot of the required engineering and the change of even data and reporting aspects that a lot of this legislation is requiring on our businesses there. All right, well, the polls are in. So just to reframe that, I guess what was the standout was effectively checklists and quick reference guides. So I'm sure, Taryn, if you want to maybe speak to a little bit of some of those areas and what you're seeing out there in the work you're doing, as well as audit and compliant assessment tools seems to be a big one. Definitely gap analysis, gap understanding is a term we're hearing more and more, kind of like 5 years ago, disruption, kept hearing that term amongst the technology groups, but certainly, yes, compliance and audit and assessing tools. And then
it's nice to see, Rob, just to point out the checklists and the quick reference guides and the audit and compliance assessment tools leading in the responses, but it's nice to see those leading as well, because that's exactly the type of work that we've been working on as well in the background to try to come up with some sort of tools and guides. So it's nice to see. When that's ready, we'll definitely share it with you.
Well, that's good that it's consistent then with that side of it. And that even extends into real life case studies and practical examples. So I know that is a practice also the department has endorsed with a lot of their overviews of care time and direct care inclusions, and putting that into a real practical application within in an operation of clinical, but also other types of areas that will be impacted by the new reforms. And then interesting where policy and procedure mapping tools. I know there's probably a lot of opportunity to even showcase what some of the new technology advancements with AI and other aspects can do and help augment organizations to really support them with the policy alignment, creation, and understanding. And then lastly, the resident and representative engagement toolkits. So that was that's also a new insight there. So we'll share that poll as well as the follow-up, but some great live questions there. And really the last one we wanted to share and really unpack is, do you believe that the 2025 reforms will lead to a measurable improvement in aged care quality? So again, a lot of this is still in the final recommendations of that Royal Commission and the safety and quality of care of aging consumers. And certainly that is the intention of what everything we're going through is driving as an industry to really focus on. But in this instance, interesting, 57% said maybe, but only if properly supported by funding and oversight. So certainly to me then, that is an alignment that it will work. However, it is in the execution of this transformation that each of you are going through is really where the rubber hits the road, and we can really ensure these changes make a measurable improvement in aged care quality. So that was our takeaway on that front. So we'll share these slides afterwards, but yeah, some great feedback, great sentiment from the execs across the country, and a great representation of 441 respondees across 390 different organizations across Australia.
Thanks, Rob. Just taking a step back a little bit and covering some of the key insights that our discussions of as mirrors have come about in the last few months, and looking at these regulatory reforms and preparing organizations for it all. Anyone with a finger on the pulse, the regulatory pulse, so to speak, will have seen these reform activity calendars that the department puts out. And while this is the latest version that we have of this plan from the 10th of December last year, there are a couple of things that I want to point out as things that are getting a bit more traction and conversations recently. People are concerned about these annual care time audits that'll be required as providers to conduct themselves and get external parties to conduct for the organisation. The standards, of course, compliance with those standards, and the regulatory model as it stands in the future, the fact that there is that fourth criteria to exceed expectations and trying to work towards that, and continuous improvement, all of those discussions have been quite important. Provider duties, of course, obligations, as we've been referring to from a commission and a department standpoint, the regulation model and the registration model, sorry, and the deeming process, and that's coming to finalisation quite soon, in the 1st of June, I think it was. So moving parts that are still needing quite a bit of a close eye recently in the providers that we're talking to, and these moving parts are getting so much more attention these days as well. Health and the implications around that, and the enforceable undertakings, which I'll cover in a second. But there's so many more documents that are being published as we get closer to the go live date for the Act as well. Just last week, the audit collection tools that have been published, and the frequently asked questions that come out, sometimes announced from the department, sometimes not as publicly announced. And so keeping a pulse on that definitely will add value to businesses as we get closer and closer to go live. Enforceable undertakings, I just wanted to point out, because in the courses that we run, in the discussions that we're having, this is getting a lot more interest recently. The fact that it's a legally binding agreement, it has been in place for a while now already, but we're seeing the Commission use this more recently now. You can see the stats at the bottom there. 3 enforceable undertakings that we've had public evidence of already prior to December last year, and 29 since. There's been mixed causes that we've seen, and so related to the cabinet compliance and the standards compliance, but there's obvious risks in just going through this as a compliance activity as well. So paying more attention to how this process is coming about, but also what that actually means for continuous improvement for an organization beyond that, because temporary advances that you make as a part of just doing it as a tick and flick exercise might not be enough, and you might be exposed to more risk that way if we treat it as just a temporary tick and flick exercise. The fact that this is meant to be a legally binding agreement that is put in place when a provider has been found to be non-compliant, and the Commission's relying on this more now because they don't want to take it straight to a sanction level, which they have done in the past. They're willing to work with providers and make sure that you are coming to compliance, working towards compliance. So that's why we're seeing more of an uptick in this, and we are expecting that number to increase as we get closer and beyond the 1st of July as well. Last little bit that I wanted to touch on is the risk proportionate and the risk-based monitoring that the Commission is taking. That approach is different to what we've seen in the past, which is exactly what I was talking about there, but before about the enforceable undertakings getting a bit more popular as a strategy that they use. But the fact that it's already seen in evidence and in action, as opposed to just waiting for the legislation to go through, we know that it'll be emphasized even more in the new legislation. And the fact that it's really informed by data and regulatory intelligence that the Commission and the Department have been gathering. So much monitoring, so much oversight, the complaints that have been going through, all of that stuff coming together is building a picture of risk for the Commission, which they've talked about it in that language as well. So they're looking at risk profiling and targeting, site audits, investigations, case management, directions and notices, of course, as well. So all this to say that there is more coming, and we have seen a start to some of the approach changes already, but there is more coming in the future. Thanks, Rob. Back to you.
No, thanks, Taryn. So definitely, definitely a lot more data, a lot of transparency, as you can see, and certainly a lot of those risk profiling tactics are about using that data that the department has been collecting and building on to really identify risks before they could potentially cause harm to our residents in care. And they've been consistent with that rhetoric and certainly seem to be now following and endorsing that through some of the data we're also seeing, as Taryn has noted. Well, let's get into our panel and the experts that we really want to focus on the panel discussion part of this for all of you. And this part of our discussion is going to be across two aspects. Part one is effectively we'll go through the panel and really talk about how the organizations have been preparing for the 2025 changes before going over to Anita from Russell Kennedy to have more of a specific content and focus on the legal frameworks behind this, and then returning back to the panel for a wider discussion. So without further ado, let me take you through our great organizations and leaders within our panel representation. So in no particular order, but from left to right, we have Lucio Flattery, the Chief Executive Officer of our dear Columbia Aged Care. And then joining us from the great state of Victoria, Verity Alif, who's the GM of Residential Services at Benetas. And then up on the central coast of a group of providers known as Alino Living, we have the CEO, Justin Dover, as well joining us. So great representation of our client base to speak to this. And then our legal expert from Russell Kennedy Lawyers is Anita Courtney, and she leads the aged care and home care and is a principal at Russell Kennedy Lawyers, who also provides a lot of our legal contractual agreements for residents and respites, and I'll use that fund. Welcome, everyone. So, Lucy, I'll probably start with you first, but before I went to Verity and Justin. But as I noted, we wanted to understand, and certainly the group and the audience who are also sitting in similar positions as you, just so that they can be reassured that they're on the right track. The things that you're doing are also the things that they're doing. But if you can share a little bit of your journey so far, as you work towards July 2025 with your teams, including how you've addressed the transition to a rights-based approach in that as well, and then highlight some of the areas where you have challenges along the way, and any other items that you want to share for the audience today. Thank you, Lucy.
Sure, thanks, Robert. Look, it's been an interesting space, and for people who've been in the care industry for a long time, it's not new. Reforms happen from time to time, so the approach we've taken is very much take a breath and think calmly. Strategically, what we've done is we've been working with our board for quite some time and making sure we understand the changes, the implications of those changes, and then very clearly including them in our strategic planning so that We understand the investment that's involved in change, but also the potential impact on revenue, on cost, etc., etc. So very high level, looking at talking with the board to make sure that they understand. They've done all the training and education in terms of governance and so forth. So that's been really important. Secondly, we did a risk assessment in terms of pulling out all of the standards and the elements of the Act that apply to practice, and did an assessment in terms of, do we have something in place? Do we need to adapt something? Do we need to create something? And I have to say, we wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of some big providers that we work collaboratively with. And I think that's been a fantastic thing that's come through these reforms, is the collaboration that we've been able to work together. So we've been able to use that assessment to prioritise what needs to happen. Predominantly, it's been our policies and procedures. So we've taken a fairly drastic approach, and we've actually pretty much thrown everything out with the baby out with the bathwater, and we've actually rewritten our entire policies and procedures manual and our standard operating procedures, just so that we can be really clear that from a rights-based perspective, it's removing any element of task, and it's really going from the prescriptive to the experiential. And all through those policies, it's been about looking at, how does the resident experience X, Y, and Z? How does a staff member know that that experience is a positive one as opposed to a negative one? Lots of education and training, and the old adage of, we're working with the vendors. They have the same amount of information we do, so we're working with vendors to scenario plan and to come up with what are our fallback positions if information isn't released. We've only got 24 business days till this thing hits. So what are we going to do in the event that actually doesn't come in time, or even by the 1st of July? So strategically working with the board, operationally looking at what does that mean, and then very much on the grassroots, how do we make that happen from a system perspective and the documentation perspective.
No, that's great insight, Lucy. Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and some great little points in there we'll come back to on that front. Verity, could we throw it to you and just hear how the organization and if there are some similarities to what Lucy at Columbia is also doing that resonated?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for everyone for your time. Yes, definitely. Certainly at the CEO level, Sandra has done exactly that with the board, taking them through what the changes mean, what, it's a huge change even for the directors in terms of the expectations of a governing body have been raised hugely. So she's doing a lot of that at that level. And then at the executive level, we have a working party, which is a fancy little acronym, which we're prone to do here at Meditas, but that's got most of the executive on it, and certainly the operational executives. And as people would know in the industry, look, to me, the largest volumes of change is happening in the supported home space, and certainly the GM of that area in our business is frantically paddling, as she says. She looks very calm on the surface, but she's frantically paddling underneath. Residential is the area that I look after, and certainly there are changes, but I'm probably not as concerned about them. The strengthened standards, apart from the standard 6 for food and nutrition, are largely similar, but obviously they are written in a much more rights-based framework. So that is a change of thinking for our staff, because whether we like it or not, I think they largely are quite task focused. So it's actually thinking about putting the person truthfully and realistically at the centre of what they're doing. And then I guess the other ones it's exercising me, but I just also can't control, is things like the statements. And, as everyone said, the software vendors are just as much in the dark as many of us, and they're playing catch up. So I pretty much take the position many things won't be ready to go live on July 1, and I think we all just need to relax about it. I also honestly think the department is not going to come out and kneecap people about it, because it has been delayed. Parliament's not even going back till July, which will be after these reforms have been introduced. So I think as long as people are making every effort to systematically do their own little checklists and share where they can, which I think is a great idea, then I think, we will get there. But this is a huge cultural shift, and that's not going to happen by July 1. You know, we're not going to be able to get the workforce to suddenly change the way they think about what they do and how they do it. That's going to be a journey we're all on probably for 12 to 18 months, if not more.
No, exactly right. I think your guidance in Verity was quite apt, and I think a lot of the viewers would really they would really appreciate those words, because I'm sure everyone has the same sense and feel, and also angst. But that's where we are, and certainly that connection with each other and working with other fellow providers too. It's really what I love also about our sector, and that fact of that rising tide, that we look out and make sure all the boats are being lifted, is a nice little analogy that we do share with others as well. Justin, let me throw it to you to also round out some of where Alino's up to in your journey.
Yes, look, I guess we're very similar to Lucy and Verity in the journey that we've taken. Our quality team spent an immense amount of time mapping and then remapping about where we need to be at. And the board is the other side that we've had a big focus on. Changing that focus from a governance to an operational, and understanding where that line is, has been challenging. I think we can all agree that the lines get very, very blurred around governance and operation particularly with the new Act. So understanding that and working on what sort of reporting we need to keep the board informed. A lot of time spent on that. Our education team spent a lot of time with not just the board, but with all our staff around what it's going to be like. I think we can't expect to have it all done, like we said earlier, by July 1. It's not going to happen. This is a journey, and it's going to take some time. We've been focusing a lot on technology as well, and what sort of technology can we use to help us with this, because there's a lot of things that are compliance based that we just have to do, but how do we make that work for the resident? And we've really been trying to work out what the best option is, because the amount of data that we have to collect, how much of that is useful, and how can we make sure that it does impact the life of the residents? And that's challenging with some of the stuff that we have to collect. I think we can all agree that there's a hell of a lot of data that we're gathering, but it's how do we transition that back to make sure it's affecting the residents in the room? That's what we're trying to focus on. So, it's been challenging, but there's been, as Lucy said earlier, there's been a lot of change in the sector over a lot of years, and this is just another one. Yes, it's big, but it's not going to be the end game. Like once this is presented to Parliament, this won't be the last iteration of this of the Act. We know it's going to change. It will continue to change, and so we're trying to make sure that we're agile enough to be able to pivot when that happens.
Yeah, it's very good points. I mean, transformation at a level of a whole sector having to go through it, but with also pretty much everything still in draft, even makes it harder to then really know where to put that energy and focus on, when still so much is yet to be really locked down and determined, which Anita will kindly take us through next. But I did resonate also with that, adapting, because that's really what transformational change is. We have to accept there's going to be points where we just don't have absolutes, and that's sometimes more comfortable for other personalities than certain individuals. But I think on balance, though, knowing as a sector, everyone feels the same way, and is feeling the same about some of the unknowns. It's healthy. It's good to note that there are elements that are still happening. So those are great approaches that all of you are sharing. I think the audience is really going to take that feedback on notice. So before I throw it to Anita, Anita's going to take us through, and we're privileged today to have her focus on really the new age care rules. And probably, Anita, this is your first time speaking to a lot of potential draft items as a lawyer. But yes, there's a lot of interesting points that you have in here. And I know you've got a nice focused segment on this. So let's take them through. So Anita from Russell Kennedy is going to take us through some of the new age care rules that we are working towards for July 1.
Thanks so much, Rob. And look, I'll just sort of let you know at the outset, I've got quite a lot of content. It was quite hard to sort of select what parts to focus on. Obviously, the slides will be available, so don't stress if we don't sort of, if it moves quite quickly. Do you want to just move to the next slide, please, Taryn? Thank you. So, I mean, I think we've made this point, but I just wanted to reiterate again, everything we have in terms of the rules is still in draft. There's about 700-800 pages of rules. And in fact, we still don't even actually have the transitional rules. And of the rules we do have, just to give you an idea, and this is double-sided, there's also gaps in there. So we really are missing a lot of really key detail. And we've also not had any feedback on the consultation. So everything I'm saying is very much based on those drafts, but unfortunately we've got that big question hanging over us. So perhaps we'll move on. So I thought I'd just talk about higher everyday living fees. I know some of you will be thinking about implementing these. You may currently be offering extra or additional services and be thinking about that transition. So I'll sort of give a bit of a recap on what this all looks like. So the key difference between the additional services and extra services regime versus this new higher everyday living fee regime is that you can no longer require it as a condition of entry. So mandatory model has gone. You must have an agreement in place with the care recipient in order to charge them for these fees. And you cannot ask them to enter into that agreement until they're in your service, or rather the start day as it's called. So previously, whereas you could sort of ask someone to sign up prior to entry, that's no longer possible. And even once they have signed up, they have a 28-day quote cooling off period where they can effectively pull out with a day's notice or less. Whereas after that, they can pull out by giving you at least, 28 days notice maximum, and that will depend on your contracts. The requirement also is that you have to review the agreement annually and whenever the resident's condition changes. And I stress that because some people are taking it could just be an annual review, but you still have to make sure the resident can use the service. So I suggest you still review that as part of their care plan review. And the final thing to note about health is that you have to transition all your existing residents by no later than 30 June next year if you want to keep charging them any sort of fee. So we'll move over. The unknowns with health, there's a number, and again, we'll be looking very closely at the final version of the rules. We don't quite know how bundling will work. We don't know yet whether you'll be able to combine the agreements into the resident agreement as we do with additional services. There's a question about if a resident walks up to the cafe and wants to buy a coffee, but they don't have a signed health agreement, could you actually charge them for the coffee, or does the barista at the coffee machine need to go and get a health agreement signed? So that's a big question at the moment. What I'm suggesting to clients for health is that you set up your contracts to give you maximum flexibility so that if you do find services aren't being taken up by residents, or that you just decide to throw in the towel altogether in 6 months, that you've got that flexibility there. So that would be the main suggestion I'd have when it comes to health. Move on to the next topic. Financial and prudential management. I know this got a lot of sort of attention in terms of liquidity, but I've just set out here sort of some of the other requirements that may have sort of been overlooked in the mix bit. You do have to have this financial and prudential management system, and that's whether you're a home care or residential care provider, similar to what we would have called the governance system previously, but there's some other things in there. I've just listed what the objectives have to be there, and it really is about making decisions more or less in the interests of individuals accessing funded aged care services. This has to be regularly reviewed. You have to provide training, etc., to staff on this, so, or rather the people who are responsible for it. So just one to watch out for. I won't talk about the liquidity. I know that's under review, but this is something you will need to have come 1 July. So we'll move on. Complaints, feedback, and whistleblowers. Again, thought I'd just make a bit of point these out. The rules about complaints management, obviously we're all used to having a complaint system, but this new regime is much more detailed in terms of what you have to have in there. Likewise, there's now these new whistleblower protections in the Act. And the thing to note about these is that versus how we might typically think of whistleblowers as, say, a corporate insider who knows something dodgy going on in an organisation, this is very broad. It's anyone who suspects, quote, there has been a breach of the Act. So in my mind, there's very little difference between someone who is a complainant versus a whistleblower, and potentially any complainant could claim to be a whistleblower. So it's going to be hard to sort of distinguish them. So what we're suggesting is that you treat complaints as complaints unless otherwise specified. So if the person says this is a whistleblower disclosure, then you manage it in accordance with your whistleblowing system. But you will need to make that clear at the outset in your policies. I don't think you want it to be up to staff to ask that question every time. Do you want this treated as a complaint through our normal complaints procedure, or do you want it a whistleblower disclosure? So I think you should have that documented in your systems and your agreement. We'll go to the next slide, please. So I thought I'd just wrap up sort of the documents you need when it comes to complaints, whistleblowers, and incident management as well. So you basically need an internal feedback, complaints and feedback system, as well as an internal whistleblower system. They may or may not be separate. We would typically think they would be separate. You also need to have a public version of both of them, which is shorter, because that's something you're going to have to translate for consumers and their supporters if they need it. So I suggest you have an internal one that might be more detailed, and then a shorter 1 to 2 pager that is something you can give to consumers. Now that document can be 1 or 2. You could potentially combine your complaints and feedback and whistleblower system into the one, or you can have them separate. And of course, I've just mentioned incidents there. These are all things that will be familiar to all of you. The incident management requirements are not changing, nor are SIRS, but I think the three sort of sit well together. So, and all of them require training at least annually. They require an annual review. And just with complaints and whistleblowers, you have to remind care recipients, consumers, and staff and responsible persons on a monthly basis that you welcome complaints and whistleblower disclosures. So you have to think about how you're going to do that. Ensure it's going out on pay slips, newsletters, monthly statements, and the like. So move on, and I thought just on this one, look, there's just a lot of information you now have to give to consumers as part of basically when they sign up, when they come into care. We've tried to go to the next slide. You can look at that in your own time, but there's 2 ways you can do this. You do it in the agreement, separate to as much as possible. And you can skip to the next slide as well. Thanks, Taryn. We've tried to capture a lot of it in the agreement. I've just put the contents page there. Most of it will be pretty familiar to you who use our agreements. But for example, we put section in for you to capture your complaints, feedback, and whistleblower policy or policies. We've put in the code of conduct, the statement of rights, and throughout the document, there's also other provisions that cover off on the above, so things like privacy. So if you aren't going to do it in your agreement because you want to keep your agreement shorter, just give some thought to how you will not only make sure the information is being given, but you're keeping a good record of that. So some sort of a set of fact sheets, make sure you're keeping an actual version control and you know exactly what you gave to that resident, because so often when people rely on other documents, there's no good clear record of exactly what was given. Record keeping, just a new requirement, don't need to spend too much time on this, but basically you now have to keep records for 7 years. Those of you in Vic and New South Wales, that will sound quite familiar, but it is still different because in Vic and New South Wales, it's 7 years from date of discharge of the resident, whereas under this Act, it's just 7 years from the date the record was created. So it's a longer period for those of you who may be in Queensland, South Australia, and Western Australia, Tasmania. The eastern seaboard states, with the exception of Queensland, more familiar with this. So just another one to look out for. Have a look at your record retention policy, and also make sure you're not holding on to things for longer than you need, because that just creates that data security risk. Associated providers, look, the point I just want to make, we're getting a lot of questions about this at the moment. There's just a lot more emphasis on and accountability for associated providers under the new Act, even though fundamentally nothing is really changing. But you will now need to report any person or any organisations you have that are associated providers. You have to have a register, report that to the Commission, and then you have to tell the Commission whenever you enter into a contract with a new associated provider, you cease a contract with an associated provider, or you vary or extend a contract with an associated provider. Now, this is the draft rules. My own view and submissions we've given on that is that that's overkill. It's really quite unnecessary to do that, particularly those last points. I mean, do they really mind if it's varied or extended as long as they know when you're starting and ending? Seems a bit silly, but either way, that is what the rules require. So that's going to take a lot of management, particularly for those of you in home care or support at home. Resi care, it's probably a bit of a narrower list, but I know it's going to be difficult for those with a lot of associated providers. So look, associated providers, again, you're accountable for them as though they were you, the services you're providing. So have good contracts in place with them, the associated provider agreements, and you also need to have auditing processes, because you can't just rely on a contract that gets shoved in a drawer and then say, we're done with overseeing and compliance. And of course, know your customer. You don't want to be leaving it to staff, to clients to raise complaints with an associated provider and you never find out about it. So of course you need to make sure that your customers, especially more so in home care where you may not have that oversight, that they are speaking to you and raising any concerns that they have. Just with as current providers, less of a panic here in terms of getting new agreements signed than in, say, support at home, but just think about when you'll renew your contracts, and do you have a good contract with all your associated providers currently? If not, you might want to try and get them onto a more robust contract sooner rather than later, but otherwise a sort of variation approach is okay. And we've come to the end. I know that was a quick sort of jump through, but hopefully that's been of some use, and obviously happy to take questions.
No, that was fantastic, Anita. A lot in there. It was a quick event of all the other overviews, and just to just resonate to all the audience. We will be sharing Anita's slides as well as this entire deck following the call, because there may be some new insights in there, and I think one of the things that jumps out to me is that there is a shift to some of activities and really risk off of what maybe with the department more onto the providers. Just looking at some of the comments about health and really looking at how there are risks now associated with scaling up and investing the cost to offer some of the constructed services. Because now of the change of the choice and the various elements. So I think definitely spanning across so many aspects of the business, which is provides more color around some of the sentiment pieces. I'm going to come back to the panel, and Justin will start. We'll go from right to left on this round through. But I know, based off of what Anita shared, and certainly to really hear more from what's on the roadmap from July onwards. We do know that there are still a lot of areas in draft, and as Anita noted, there's still elements that we will have to wait. So how you're tackling that, and some of the other plans you have post July, please share for the audience.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it follows on from what I said earlier, is that I've been in aged care a long time, and I had long flowing hair when I started, and look at me now. But if we go back, we've gone, RCS, ACFI, ANAC. We've had things like the Living Longer, Living Better. We've had numerous iterations of the aged care standards and different titles. Every single one of those implementations has had unintended consequences. Every time the department will come out and say, oh, that was an unintended consequence, this will be the same. Absolute, somewhere in there that will happen. And so there'll be changes. And we spoke earlier about adapting. That's the part we have to keep in, we're certainly keeping in mind, because this will not be set and forget. It is going to continue to change as every other one has. It's always fairer and simpler, and this will be the same. It will continue to change. We're not doing anything that we can't adapt. So everything we're trying to put in place is really about making sure it's adaptable. I mentioned earlier around the technology side of things, we're really trying to make that work for us. The use of AI, we're trying to focus a lot on that. And look at every one of our systems, whether it be, finance, compliance, our minutes compliance, looking at all those sort of things, and how can we make sure that we've got technology working for us. We're looking at developing our own. in the process of developing my own AI reporting tool. But it's about complementing what we already do, not replacing. So we're really trying to make sure that it works with us. The care time audits, we're spending a lot of time on that, just trying to work out the best way forward with that, and how we can make sure that again it's easier access and the technology is working for us, and educating everybody in that process, continuing with the education, because this is being such a big change. Trying to bring everybody along is a real challenge for all of our staff. So the other part is part of our roadmap is really looking at, okay, we've got the compliance side coming with all the new act, but what does residential aged care look like in the next 5, 6, 10 years? With all these things coming in, as an organisation, where do we fit? What does that look like? And, what is our model of care going to look like? What do our buildings need to look like? All those sort of things. So that's really front and centre at the moment to go. We know that the act is coming in, but what are we really going to deliver at the end of the day? And that's what we're trying to focus on. So, because if we don't have that right, then we don't have a business. So that's really where we're focusing on. So really the getting technology to work for us, and being adaptable is probably the two main points what we're focusing on.
No, that's fantastic, Justin. A lot in there too with, using and helping some of the staff augment some of these, really the reporting and the data structures that really aren't part of the BAU of a lot of the systems that were built for yesteryear operations and regulatory requirements. So I know that is imposing a lot of time and manual time on clinicians, quality team members, educators, and the like. So that's great suggestions in there. Verity, you can come and add a little bit on to also Justin's and hear about your enterprise and their approach.
Thank you. Pretty much very similar. I mean, we're already talking about what's the customer of the future going to look like. Certainly in residential aged care, our thinking is that aged care is likely to become more and more subacute. So I'm already thinking about, well, what does that mean for skilling up nurses? Infusion pumps, IV antis, blood transfusions, maybe more. So what's that going to look like? Because I'm sure we're all seeing they're coming in later and later, and that's what these supported home reforms are designed to do, keep people at home where they want to be for longer. So they will come in later, and they will come in with more and more complex health needs. Some of the other things we're doing quite similar to, look, already were embarked on quite a major IT strategy. So at the moment in my space, we're looking for a new care management system, and certainly one that can do a lot of what Justin just said, so that it's got AI over it. It frees staff time up from documentation, which is necessary, but also a lot of the data collection, which the Commonwealth want, NQIP and a lot of other things, that we can make that less manual and easier for the staff to either pull out, or it automatically gets pulled out and submitted, will really help. And then I think even looking at not so much exactly a carer who's sort of doing multiple tasks. I don't envisage them doing personally, not in our business anyway, the home care type things such as cleaning or food service so much, but definitely looking at breaking down that barrier between carers and lifestyle people, and that everyone is responsible for the quality of life of residents living in our care, and there shouldn't be this sort of demarcation between carers and that's lifestyle's job. So there's some of the things we're looking at a lot, and that'll have huge implications for our PC&D team about even what does our recruitment look like, how do we screen better, how do we performance support and manage if that's what we have to do, because if the expectation of the customer is going to raise and our expectations of ourselves is going to raise, we're going to really want to know that we've got a very high caliber workforce going on that sort of journey with us. So we've got to really look at our ramping up what our PC&D and HR type of processes look like.
No, that's excellent, and you paint a very very true picture of what really a subacute industry is becoming, with really more of a partnership alignment between the acute sector and especially the infrastructure that your enterprise has invested in. Lucy, we'll flow to you to add to some of those, as well as anything further that you would like to comment on.
Look, again, very similar to my colleagues. We've been using AI for a while, and I guess what we've done is we've taken the approach of working with people outside of the aged care industry and outside of the care industry. So we're working with IT designers and analysts, so people that are working with data lakes, so that we can actually look at all of us. The vendors are never going to be able to do everything we want to do. That's just a reality. So looking at it from a different lens and saying, well, how do we build data lakes, and then we can just extract what we can get. This product environment operates in different industries, so we're trying to align ourselves with the more broader data analytics side of things to, again, make this simpler, faster, more reliable. Our focus is very much about quality, not quantity. So let's get the small things right and then build from that. And I guess the other thing we're looking at is, once we've got the basics in place, this is a rights-based environment. This is a person-centered approach. We want to look at customer journey mapping so that we understand at any given time, what's important and how are we going against those sorts of things. Again, similar to adjacent industries like hospitality, that, this happens all the time. You check in, and by the time you've checked in, you get a how did we do a check-in. So we can't make it hospitality, but we can certainly learn lessons around that ongoing monitoring and checking in with consumers and their families about how are you experiencing the service, because it's an experiential environment now.
Yeah, and a lot of that data that is now, I would say, is available if you can capture it. It does produce a lot of unique insights, but also beyond the insights, as Justin was noting, there are time-saving activities at the core of that. Things like gathering the NQIP data points, and as well as care activity statements, and on and on and on, as we really explore some of the new technologies coming in. And I guess some great points too from a vendor position. I guess speaking from being a vendor, a lot of the activities that we're looking at strategically for us to support the industry is to really help providers take more of the balls out of the air. Really provide our clients with that ability to even we're looking at with a lot of our workforce and care minute manager applications is to actually provide also the care time audits for those groups, because we have all the documentation of the technology and how it's been implemented. So therefore, these are just activities to streamline and help really bring more value as a vendor that's focused specifically on the sector, but on more of a future outlook of what the challenges will continue to be as we really think about post-July 1 and bringing all of this into an operational rhythm that that will satisfy the department and the commission's requirements as they see through. So we do have some time for some questions at the end as well. And as we jump through that and jump to Ben to open some of the items up too, Anita, if you wanted to also share any, I guess, aspects that you saw or heard just from the provider's point of view and how they're taking that, and certainly for the audience, please send through some further questions in there, and Ben will be reading them out as we go along.
Look, I just think, Lucy's point about, just taking in your stride, I think that's sort of what we're all doing. I mean, one of the things that I've found really, really challenging is not being able to kind of give people black and white answers on some of this stuff. We're kind of working off half-drafted rules in some cases. And I think there's, it's never good to rely on the commission being lenient. That's not my preferred approach. But I think in the circumstances we're faced, everyone's just sort of doing their best. I think, provided you're, working towards compliance when we can be fully compliant and we know exactly what it is we're aiming for, provided you've got a plan, I think, you know, I can see providers being in a good position in terms of not having to worry about it, and ultimately focusing on care, because that is really always the thing that will bring anyone unstuck. And things like whether your whistleblower policy is going to be perfect on July 1, I really don't think is going to be the problem. It's as long as you've got a plan for, you know, and some dates in place for when you'll come into compliance and things. So yeah, that'd be my reflection. But certainly there's a lot of uncertainty, and just I've now been through 2 reforms since I was a baby lawyer, and you know, living longer, living better. We had all the drafts, at least in draft, by September of the prior year. This time we're in May, almost June, and we still don't have all the drafts. So, you know, it's a really, really challenging environment for everyone. So I do feel and share the pain, although not, of course, to the same extent as all the providers out there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that is especially for a solicitor to look at and advise clients on vagueness and non-absolutes. I can imagine that's a very difficult point of view. Ben, on the chat,
Yep.
just want to see
Thanks,
some of the key themes that you wanted to highlight for the audience.
Yeah, so there's a few questions, and this one probably is for Anita, but I think I know the answer to this one. Are the agreement templates any closer to readiness for purchase? But I'm assuming you're probably waiting for that final legislation to drop.
Yeah, look, they still are very much in draft. So we're really not in a position. Look, support at home, I'll put to one side. It's a slightly different situation there. But with Resi Care, certainly, you know, obviously you have until 1 July to start using them, but you might be wanting to give them to people now to admit them after 1 July. They are still in draft, but I guess you do always have that ability to make changes prior to them actually coming in. It would just be important to communicate them, but they are very much in draft, and we're not recommending anyone sort of distribute them or use them at the moment as a starting point.
Right, thank you. There are a few comments. There's also some other questions, and thank you to the panelists who've answered those in the chat. But some other ones, there's definitely a few on workforce, some that came in before the webinar. So I'll ask those ones. So one of the questions was, in what is still a labour short market, how does a panel foresee dealing with the increased care minutes and the changes to the definition of who qualifies to provide care minutes? Should providers ready themselves to see a surge in nursing agency usage? And then another one today, similar sort of thing around workforce and your thoughts on the suitability of our current workforce makeup, mostly being PCAs, to realistically be able to upskill what currently sits with the skill level compared to ENs and above. So yeah, a number of workforce concerns and questions for the panel.
I'm happy to take a crack at this, Robert. Look, I think I am privileged to lead an organisation that's been around for about 50 years, and with 3 services across New South Wales. There's a mixed tenure in terms of staffing. One of our services in particular has got staff that have been there 30, 40 years. I think when you look at the mix of staffing we have, there is a real challenge around the currency of skills, the exposure to the skills that they need to have, and that's what we're trying to build into our employee value proposition. It's a real challenge, and in terms of the ability, like what's going to happen with care minutes and stuff, I think some of that comes down, in my view, to how you've implemented the definition that was originally put out there. We elected to choose that it's only direct personal care workers that are counted in care minutes. So for us, it won't make a difference. But I do understand that other organisations have taken a different view. So I think it's going to be really challenging. And having had a few conversations in rural remote settings with Commission and the department, I think there's a lot of clarity that's still required, because it's been confusing from time to time.
Very good points, and definitely a lot of those policies were made with guidance through newsletters and updates. That has been difficult to keep an eye on some of those nuances, but I think there's also hints in there about looking at the enrolled nursing cohort, using some of the time that they're allowing as a way that the department's also suggesting some of the wider inclusion of some of the staff. So that's certainly been parts of it too.
And look, Rob, there's probably one other question, because I'm just looking at the time. But there are a number of sort of a couple of comments, but also a question just around AI examples. So for those that AI has mentioned, are there any practical examples or information you can provide of how you're utilizing AI tools in your current practices?
From a very simplistic perspective, we put all of our policies into Gemini, which is the Google version of AI, and asked it to make sure that it was compliant with Aged Care Standards and Aged Care Act, and it popped out some key areas. So really, from a very simple perspective, we chucked it in and said, give us some feedback.
Yep.
Mm.
Fantastic.
Justin, I know that's a bit of a passion for you too.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many different levels to it. Starting really simple is a good way to start, like Lucy said, but pushing into getting AI to start to read some of the reports that we're already producing. Around our care statements, we're using AI to help generate those care statements. So it's actually diving into our care systems and pulling some of the data out. And we're working with Mirrors on that as well. But that's something I'm really excited about, because that is so time consuming to capture that data. And if we can find a way to automate that, that is going to really help our staff on the floor to be able to put the time into caring for the residents, which is what we want them to be doing, not paperwork.
Yeah, good points. Great points.
And Rob, if I can just jump in, it's not just in the care side that we're using AI. So we use AI in our finance system, so that it's about reducing the resourcing that's required in our back end of the business, so that we've got more ability to put it into the front end of our business.
That's a very good point too, Lucy, because really AI is powerful technology if you have the data and the good data to let it do its magic on. And certainly from finance to clinical notes to even just observational data points about consumers moving around in the workforce, and all aspects of it is really the new frontier for us. But it really starts with getting control of your data and having that data in a shape and format in which you can now start to really explore the AI and through it. Great feedbacks on that front. Well, I hate to close it off because we do have a lot of great interest, but in terms of just running a little bit behind school schedule, we do have a quality and compliance support program that we are working with providers to help them in more of a governance role. Some of these frameworks and toolboxes and other assessments that that's been noted that are available there. And also for everyone in the sessions, for your team members, we are giving a 20% off webinar use code for our regulatory reform training. So again, these are also great courses because they do evidence the activities that you are going through, and you can support that with the certificates we provide you as part of your program of really enabling the change management across your enterprises. And certainly with the amount of attention this is getting, and as we approach the July 1 deadline, our next webinar is going to be focused on from policy to practice. So really going beyond the what is in the reforms to now the how. And certainly the panel has shared some amazing feedback, experience, frameworks, and we really want to continue on that thread and really share some of the meaningful steps that providers are taking. And I know we touched a little bit at the end here on AI, but I think we can also explore a little bit of what those technologies are looking like to really help everyone move through this quite swiftly. So thank you again to our panel members. Thank you to Anita joining us from Russell Kennedy's, and from Taryn, thank you for your work on the regulatory outcomes. Until next time, I'm Robert Gavino, and I look forward to our next discussion, our next webinar. Until then, please keep doing what you do. Thank you all.